General Vance Stone, the man who had spent his career as the architect of high-signature war at the Pentagon, sat in a secure subterranean facility in Tampa, Florida. It was November 25, 2001. On the 16 high-definition monitors before him, the God-Eye satellite feed was focused on a 19th-century mud-brick fortress in northern Afghanistan, Qala-i-Jangi. To the American public, the war was a series of clean, televised airstrikes. But to Stone, it was a digital chessboard. He had authorized a special activities mission for the CIA, sending in 2 paramilitary officers, Mike Spann and David Tyson, to interrogate 500 surrendered Al-Qaeda foreign fighters. He had given the Yanks a multi-billion-dollar safety net, orbital surveillance, persistent drone coverage, and a carrier strike group in the Arabian Sea on 10-minute standby. He believed that the Yank dollar had bought the silence of the grave. "Colonel," Stone said, his voice vibrating with the cold authority of a man who trusts his senses more than his soul. "Give me the biometric update on the CIA team. Why is Spann's signal static? And why am I looking at a kinetic event in the southern courtyard? My data link says these prisoners were processed and disarmed. Tell me, has the British element arrived yet? I want Hereford to see what happened when the CIA manages a surrender." The USMC colonel beside him stared at the screen, his face turning a sickly shade of grey. "General, we have a total system failure. The prisoners weren't searched. The Yank vetting process was a checklist, not an audit. They had grenades hidden in their robes. Spann is down. Tyson is trapped in the Pink Palace. And General, the 10th Mountain Division just called for Emergency Close Air Support, CAS. They've got a Navy F-18 overhead. They're dropping a JDAM, a Joint Direct Attack munition. They want to delete the revolt in one strike." A quiet, dry, rasping sound came from the corner of the room, the sound of a manual match being struck. A British SBS major, a man with skin like parched parchment and a faded wool smock that smelled of high-altitude ozone and old tea, was lighting a cigarette. He didn't have a tablet. He didn't have a headset. He had a pair of manual Steiner binoculars hanging around his neck. "General Stone, your smart bomb is about to do something very stupid," the major said, his voice a cold, clinical needle through the American panic. "Your Yanks are data drunk. They've just entered the wrong coordinates into the GPS link. Your pilot is looking at a digital mirror of the target, not the target itself. In 3 seconds, you aren't going to delete the Al-Qaeda revolt. You're going to suicide your own command element. While your Yanks are praying to a satellite, my SBS lads are currently 400 meters away, watching you bury yourselves." Before we reveal how 8 British thinking soldiers took control of a burning fortress after the American Air Force bombed their own men, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. We are the only channel exposing the DNA of the ghost and why the Yank obsession with gadgets is a death sentence when the first shot is fired. If you want to see how the British outthought the Pentagon while the CIA was running for their lives, like this video right now. And tell us in the comments, is the American military too dependent on smart weapons that aren't actually smart? Type "pool" in the comments if you stand with the SBS. To understand the hardcore humiliation of Part 1, you have to understand the acoustic mirage of the JDAM. In the American manual, a 2,000-pound bomb is a strategic reset. The Yanks believe that if the ground stops moving, the problem is solved. At 11:15, the F-18 dropped the munition. But the Yank liaison on the ground, a captain who had been trained in a simulator but never in the mud, had fat-fingered the coordinate entry. He had entered the location of his own command trench instead of the insurgent-held armory. The explosion was a biological erasure. The 2,000-pound JDAM didn't hit the Al-Qaeda fighters. It hit the Northern Alliance command post, where the American Special Forces and CIA advisors were gathered. The overpressure wave pulverized the mud walls and collapsed the lungs of everyone within 50 meters. The Yank technology had just committed tactical seppuku. "General, we've hit the Blue Force," the colonel screamed. "We have dozens of friendly casualties. The command loop is dead. The Yanks are in a state of cognitive erasure. No one is moving. The Al-Qaeda cells are swarming the breach. We've just handed them the fortress." Vance Stone sat back, his digital god world shattered. He watched the thermal feed. The American survivors were stumbling through the dust, blind, deaf, and screaming into radios that had been liquidated by the blast. They were weapon soldiers who had just been disarmed by their own weaponry. "The silicon ceiling, Silas," the SBS major said, standing up and heading toward the door. "Your Yanks built a military that can only win if the GPS says yes. But the GPS just told you to kill yourselves. While your apex predators are sitting in the dirt, waiting for a rescue protocol that doesn't exist, my lads. The 8 ghosts you told to stay in the rear are currently entering the fortress. They didn't bring any smart bombs. They brought their eyes, their grit, and the thinking soldier's primary tool, the L119A1. The SBS team, led by a sergeant major named Mick, hadn't waited for orders.
They had inhibited the blast wave and used the American dust cloud as their organic camouflage. They moved in a diamond formation, 4 men on the ground, 4 on the parapet. They weren't wearing the heavy 80-pound Yank armor. They were stripped down for speed. "The manual entry protocol," Graham whispered to the silent Yanks in the Tampa hive. "Mick and his lads aren't looking for a digital target. They're reading the air. They know the Al-Qaeda fighters are high on the victory scent of your failure. They're moving into the Pink Palace now. No noise, no drones, just 8 thinking soldiers against 500 fanatical killers. While you're writing the incident report, Silas, my lads are starting the liquidation." The humiliation is only beginning. If you think the Yanks are about to learn a hardcore lesson in humility, hit the like button. In the next 20,000 characters, we're going to show you how the SBS tracked the Al-Qaeda masterminds through the smoke and rescued the surviving CIA agents who had been abandoned by their own military. You must watch until part 5 to find out the secret the Pentagon tried to bury. Comment "Thinking Soldier" below if you believe that brains beat bombs. We are reading every single comment. Vance watched the monitor. He saw 8 tiny blue dots, the SBS, moving with a fluid precision into the heart of the chaos. They were passing the apex US Special Forces, who were still in a state of shock. One SBS operator, a man who would later be awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, didn't stop to help the Yanks. He simply slapped the American colonel on the shoulder, handed him a British 10-pence coin, and whispered, "Move aside, Yank. The professionals are here." The JDAM Suicide was over. The British retribution was just beginning. The Yanks had the satellites. The British had the guts. And in the fortress of Qala-i-Jangi, guts were about to show the world the difference between a soldier and a ghost. The dust of the JDAM blast didn't just hang in the air of Qala-i-Jangi. It had become a physical entity, a grey, gritty shroud that tasted of pulverized limestone and atomized cordite. In the Tampa hive, General Vance Stone watched the thermal monitors with a sense of
cognitive dissonance. On the screen, the American Special Forces icons were flashing a frantic, pulsing yellow, the system distress signal. They were huddled in the impact crater, their high-tech communication arrays shattered, their neural link with the Pentagon severed by the very bomb they had called in. "Colonel," Vance said, his voice stripped of its usual military rhythm, sounding instead like a man reporting a terminal medical diagnosis. "Why are our apex predators static? We have 24 Green Berets and a CIA paramilitary team in that courtyard. They should be executing a suppression and maneuver drill. Instead, they look like they're waiting for a bus. My data link says their combat effectiveness is dropping below 30%. Why aren't they moving?" The USMC colonel adjusted the gain on the satellite feed, his hands trembling. "General, it's the concussive lag. The JDAM hit within 50 meters of their position. Their smart helmets, the ones with the integrated noise-cancelling headsets, actually amplified the acoustic shock because the software couldn't process the decibel spike. Their inner ears are liquidated, Silas. They have no balance. They're data-blind and acoustically-shattered. They're waiting for the med-evac protocol to kick in. But the Al-Qaeda cell? General, the insurgents didn't have headsets to fail. They're already swarming the Pink Palace with RPGs. They're hunting our people in the smoke." A dry, rhythmic clicking sound came from the shadows, the sound of a British SAS major, Alistair Graham, clicking a manual tally counter. He wasn't looking at the digital telemetry. He was looking at a 19th century sketch of the fortress layout. "The yank tax of shock, Silas," Graham said, his voice a low-frequency hum that vibrated in the silent room. "You've built a military that can only function if the sensory input is clean. Your Yanks are data addicts. When the bomb hit, it didn't just destroy the wall, it destroyed their digital god. They're waiting for a satellite to tell them it's okay to stand up. But the SBS, well, my lads don't wait for the cloud to reboot. They've been training for the manual hardcore since they were teenagers in the mud of Poole. While your apex predators are checking their tablets for a system restore, Mick and his 8 ghosts have already reached the Pink Palace threshold. They aren't shocked, General. They're indexing. If you're finding this yank roasting and the absolute manual supremacy of the British SBS as addictive as we are, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. We are the only channel deconstructing the DNA of the ghost and exposing why the billion-dollar American machine turns into a paper tiger when the batteries die. You must watch this entire series until part 5, because the final revelation of what the SBS found inside the Pink Palace will explain why the CIA tried to erase the British from the history books. Like this video to support the thinking soldier doctrine, and comment below, Poole, if you know that grit beats gadgets. Let's get back to the neural lag. To understand the hardcore humiliation of part 2, you have to understand the acoustic biology of the British Special Boat Service. In the American manual, stealth is a technological achievement, silicon and software. But in the SBS, stealth is a neural state. The 8-man SBS team didn't enter the fortress with a high signature shout. They didn't have the $40,000 quad-tube goggles that the Yanks were currently trying to unfog. They moved in manual synchronicity. Led by Mick, the sergeant major, the team approached the Pink Palace, the central administrative block where the CIA agents were trapped. The building was crawling with Al-Qaeda foreign fighters, men who had survived the blast and were now in a state of narcotic frenzy. They were firing PKM machine guns blindly into the smoke. In the American Tier 1 playbook, the response to unseen fire is to saturate the sector, to fire back with volume until the sensors can find the lock. The Yanks want the ground to shake so the enemy is too terrified to shoot.
But Mick didn't have any volume. He didn't want any. He signaled zero acoustic. The 8 SBS operators transitioned to their surgical mode. They didn't fire their L119A1s from the shoulder. They moved in a crouched glide, their carbines held at the low ready, using the vibration of the enemy's PKM fire to find their positions. The vibration audit, Graham explained to the stunned Yanks in the Tampa hive. Mick isn't looking for a thermal dot. He's reading the masonry. He knows the Al-Qaeda gunners are leaning against the southern pillars because the harmonic frequency of the PKM is echoing off the stone. He doesn't need a drone to see them. He can feel them through the soles of his boots. Your apex predators are data blind, Silas, but my lads are biologically linked to the fight. Mick reached the main door of the palace. He didn't use a hydraulic ram. He didn't use a flashbang, which would have been useless in the existing smoke. He used a manual breach, a simple, weighted kick to the door's latch point, timed perfectly with the explosion of a secondary Al-Qaeda grenade 50 meters away. The door opened in silence. The SBS team flowed into the hallway like a digital deletion. They encountered 3 Al-Qaeda fighters in the first room. The insurgents were high on adrenaline, expecting a Yank assault, loud commands, bright lasers, and the shock and awe of Hollywood. They found the silence of Hereford. Mick didn't fire a burst. He used surgical single shots. 3 targets, 3 rounds of 5.56mm ball. All 3 struck the insurgents in the medulla oblongata, the base of the brain. The targets didn't fight. They didn't react. Their nervous systems were simply unplugged. "The manual liquidation protocol," Graham whispered. "No noise, no digital signature. Just 8 thinking soldiers clearing a palace while your smart bomb specialists are still trying to find their own feet in the dirt. While your Yanks are processing the failure, my lads have already harvested the first floor." Vance watched the monitor, his face a mask of professional shattering. He saw the readiness screen. The US Special Forces, 20% combat effective. The SBS, 100%. One squad of British ghosts was doing what 100 Yank operators couldn't. They were winning the building. "General, we have a signal lock from Tyson," the colonel shouted. "The surviving CIA agent is in the basement. He says the Al-Qaeda cells are trying to smoke him out. He's calling for an emergency airstrike on the palace. He wants to level the building to save himself." "Authorize the strike," Vance screamed. "Hold your fire, Silas," the SBS major barked, standing up and towering over the general. "If you drop another bomb, you'll kill my lads and the CIA agent. Your smart solution is just another way to hide your neural lag. Tell your pilot to head back to the carrier. Mick is already at the basement door. He doesn't need a JDAM. He just needs 15 seconds. The humiliation is only getting deeper. If you want to see how the SBS rescued the abandoned CIA agent while the Pentagon was trying to bomb him in Part 3, hit that like button.
We are revealing the black box of Hereford mastery and why the Yank budget is the most expensive suicide note in history. Subscribe and comment Ghost below to see the final 3 parts. We are reading every single comment. Back at the palace, Mick reached the basement stairs. The air was thick with the smell of burning tires. The Al-Qaeda fighters were trying to suffocate the trapped American. Mick didn't have a smart mask with a digital filter.
He pulled a damp chamarg cloth over his face and drew his Browning high-power sidearm. "The hardcore second," Graham noted, his eyes gleaming. "Mick is going into a gas trap with a 1935 design pistol and a rag. This isn't modern warfare, Silas. This is primal attrition. And in the dark, the man with the will is the only one who walks out." As Mick descended into the black smoke, the neural lag of the American machine was total. The Yanks had the satellites, the British had the guts, and in the basement of Qala-i-Jangi, guts were about to discover the first part of the secret that would haunt the CIA for 20 years. The basement of the Pink Palace was a literal lung of fire. The air was a thick, carbon-rich soup of incinerated documents, melting tires, and the sweet, cloying scent of TATP explosives. Inside the Tampa hive, the digital sensors on David Tyson's CIA-issued biometric vest were screaming. His heart rate was at 192 beats per minute. His oxygen saturation icon was flashing a lethal violet. To the American analysts 10,000 miles away, Tyson wasn't a man anymore. He was a data point on the verge of biological termination. "General, Tyson is entering the red zone," the USMC colonel shouted, his fingers flying across the keyboard to try and boost the localized signal. "The Al-Qaeda cells have blocked the primary exits with debris. They're pumping smoke into the crawl spaces. Tyson is reporting that he's down to his last magazine for his Browning high power. He's calling for a kinetic relief. He wants us to drop a thermobaric charge on the northern wing to clear the smoke. He's in a state of survival psychosis, Silas. He's begging us to level the house just to give him a chance to breathe." General Vance Stone stared at the screen, his soul digitally paralyzed. He was ready to authorize the strike, to trade $1 million building and the lives of anyone inside for the brand integrity of a rescued CIA agent. "Silas, if you drop that charge, you aren't saving Tyson. You're vaporizing the truth," the British SBS Major Alistair Graham said, his voice cutting through the American panic like a cold-bore sniper shot. "Your Yanks think that a big bang is a solution to a small-room problem. But Mick is already at the basement threshold. He doesn't have a thermobaric charge. He has a damp rag and the pool standard. While your agent is praying to a satellite for a miracle, my lad is currently inhaling the threat." If you're finding this Yank roasting and the absolute manual supremacy of the British SBS as addictive as we are, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. We are the only channel deconstructing the DNA of the ghost and exposing why the billion-dollar American machine turns into a paper tiger when the air gets thin. You must watch this entire series until part 5, because the final revelation of what Mick found in those Al-Qaeda documents will explain why the CIA tried to pay the British government to keep this mission top secret for 50 years. Like this video to support the Thinking Soldier doctrine, and comment below, "Ghost," if you know that a British sergeant is the real deal. Let's get back to the manual rescue. To understand the hardcore humiliation of Part 3, you have to understand the acoustic shadow. In the American manual, a search and rescue (SAR) mission is a high signature event.
You want the enemy to know you're coming, so they break and run. The Yanks want the sound of freedom, screaming jet engines and barking commands. But Mick, the SBS Sergeant Major, knew that noise in a burning basement is a death sentence. He didn't wear the $15,000 electronic oxygen mask that the Green Berets in the crater were currently trying to unjam. He used a simple manual rebreather and a wet schmarg. He didn't have a smart flashlight with an integrated laser aimer. He moved in the strobe light of the fires, using the flickering orange glow as his visual timing. The flicker sync protocol, Graham explained to the stunned Yanks in the hive, Mick is timing his steps to the pulse of the fire. When the flames flare, he stays still. When they dim, he moves. He's using the environment as his digital jammer. To the Al-Qaeda insurgents in that basement, he isn't a soldier. He's a ghost that only appears in the dead frames of their vision. Mick reached the central cellar room. Through the black smoke, he saw David Tyson. The CIA agent was huddled behind a stone pillar, his eyes wide, his uniform scorched. 3 Al-Qaeda fighters were 10 meters away, preparing to toss a satchel charge into his position. They were laughing, confident that the Yank was cornered. Mick didn't use his L119A1 carbine. The muzzle flash would have illuminated the room and signaled his position to the 50 other insurgents in the hallway above. He drew his Browning high power, a 9mm pistol designed in the 1930s. It was manual. It was mechanical. It was reliable. He fired 3 surgical pairs. "The manual deletion," Graham whispered. 6 rounds, 3 targets. All 6 rounds struck the insurgents in the T-box of the skull. They didn't even have time to drop the satchel charge. Mick liquidated the threat for the cost of 6 9mm bullets. No drones, no JDAMs, no collateral damage. Mick stepped through the smoke and grabbed Tyson by the collar of his vest. He didn't offer a heroic speech. He didn't check the agent's biometric status. He leaned in and whispered 4 words that would later be recorded in Tyson's declassified debrief. "Stop crying, Yank. Move." Back in the hive, Vance watched the biometric link for Tyson suddenly stabilize. The heart rate dropped from 192 to 140. The oxygen level started to climb. "He's got him!" the colonel shouted. "Mick has Tyson! They're moving to the extraction point. General, authorize the rescue birds. We need the MH-47s to land in the courtyard now." "Hold your birds, sailors," the major barked. "The courtyard is a kill box. There are 300 Al-Qaeda fighters on the parapets with RPG-7s. Your vultures will be shot out of the sky before they touch the ground. Mick isn't going to the courtyard. He's going to the parapet. He's going to inhabit the high ground." The humiliation is only getting deeper. If you want to see how the 8 SBS ghosts held a fortress against 500 fanatics while the Navy SEALs were still fixed in the crater in Part 4, hit that like button. We are revealing the black box of Hereford mastery and why the Yank budget is the most expensive suicide note in history. Subscribe and comment Hereford below to see the conclusion. We are reading every single comment. The hardcore reality of Part 3 was the siege of the Pink Palace. Mick and Tyson reached the roof. They were joined by the other 7 SBS operators who had been clearing the parapet. Now, 8 British thinking soldiers were standing on a 19th century mud wall, looking down at a sea of grey. 400 Al-Qaeda foreign fighters swarming the courtyard below. In the American manual, this is a Category Black catastrophe. You conserve ammunition and wait for massed air support. But the SBS don't wait for the sky to fall. They manage the slaughter. Mick looked at his team. They were low on ammunition. They had no grenades left. They were 8 men against an army. He didn't call for a smart bomb. He looked at the Northern Alliance ammunition crates they had harvested from the first floor. They were full of old Soviet-made F-1 grenades, the ones the Yanks called museum junk. "The manual gravity kill," Graham noted, his eyes gleaming with a dark professional pride. Mick didn't use a precision-guided munition. He used gravity and timing.
His lads started dropping those Soviet grenades into the primary mass of the insurgents. They weren't aiming for individuals. They were calculating the blast radius of the masonry. They turned the very walls of the fortress into secondary shrapnel. They were industrializing the defense with 50-year-old technology. For 3 hours, the 8 ghosts of the SBS held the Pink Palace. They fired in controlled pairs, refusing to use full auto. Every bullet was a strategic asset. Every round was a contractual obligation to kill. Vance sat in silence in the temper hive. He saw the readiness screen. The Navy SEALs in green berets in the crater, 15% combat effective. The SBS on the roof, 100%. One squad of British thinking soldiers had just liquidated the Al-Qaeda counter-revolt for the cost of a few boxes of old grenades and the grit of Hereford. The fortress trap was a mindset trap, Silas, the Major said, walking toward the tactical nap. You thought the smart bomb would win the war. We knew the Browning pistol and the wet rag would win the building. Your Yanks are software soldiers. My lads, well, they're hardware ghosts. And in the hardcore reality of Qala-i-Jangi, the hardware just took your lunch. But as Mick stood on the roof, watching the smoke clear, he noticed a small black pelican case tucked under the arm of one of the dead Al-Qaeda leaders. It wasn't an insurgent tool.
It had a CIA property tag on the side. Mick picked it up. He didn't open it. He looked at the Yank agent, Tyson, who was staring at the case with a look of pure, unadulterated panic. "The package Omega," Mick whispered. The thinking soldier had just discovered the ultimate trauma for the American machine. The Fortress of the Damned was no longer a rescue mission. It was a national security crisis. And the SBS weren't going to sanitize this one for the Yanks. The sun was descending behind the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush, casting long, bruised shadows across the blood-soaked courtyards of Qala-i-Jangi. The smoke from the Pink Palace had settled into a low, toxic fog that tasted of incinerated history and American failure. On the roof of the administrative block, the 8 operators of the Special Boat Service, SBS, stood like statues of weathered granite. They were low on ammunition. Their uniforms were stiff with dried mud and the copper-scented spray of close-quarters liquidation, but their neural integrity remained at 100%. In the Tampa hive, the digital sensors were finally flickering back to life. General Vance Stone watched as the Blue Force icons for the US Green Berets and Navy SEALs, the ones who had been liquidated by their own JDAM in Part 1, began to move sluggishly out of the impact crater. To the Pentagon satellites, it looked like a recovery. To the British SBS Major, Alistair Graham, it looked like a walk of shame. "Colonel," Vance said, his voice a dry, hacking cough, "the 5th Special Forces Group element has reached the southern gate of the palace. They're reporting heavy gear attrition. Their $40,000 thermal optics are shattered. Their mesh net radios are in a state of permanent error. But they have a tactical link with Tyson. Tell me, what is the status of the package Omega?" The USMC colonel adjusted the gain on the satellite feed, his eyes widening. "General, we have a visual anomaly. Tyson is on the roof with the SBS team. He's in a state of acute agitation. My analysts are lip-reading the helmet cam feed from one of the SEALs. It looks like the British Sergeant Major, Mick, is holding the Pelican case. He's refusing to hand it over to Tyson. He's performing a manual audit of the SEAL. General, the SBS is denying access to American property on an American-led battlefield."
Graham let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like a shovel hitting dry earth. "Refusing access, Silas? My lad isn't refusing anything. He's securing the evidence. You see, when Mick found that case tucked under the arm of an Al-Qaeda commander, he noticed something the Yank manual doesn't cover. The thermal seal on that CIA case wasn't broken by an insurgent. It was opened with a digital key code, a Yank code. Your package Omega wasn't captured by the enemy, Silas. It was delivered to them. And Hereford just found the receipts. If you're finding this Yank roasting and the absolute regimental retribution of the British SBS as addictive as we are, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. We are the only channel deconstructing the DNA of the ghost and exposing why the billion-dollar American machine turns into a paper tiger when the secrets start to leak. You must watch this entire series until part 5, because the final revelation of what was written on the last page of those CIA ledgers will change your understanding of the entire Afghan war. Like this video to support the Thinking Soldier doctrine, and comment below, "Retribution," if you know the SBS was right to keep the case. Let's get back to the trauma of the truth. To understand the hardcore humiliation of Part 4, you have to understand the Yank tax of corruption. In the American manual, the war in Afghanistan was a procurement war. The Yanks wanted to buy victory by financing every warlord and partner force that claimed to hate the Taliban. They built a digital web of informants, paying them millions in non-traceable funds. But the SBS had just liquidated the web. Mick stood on the roof, the Black Pelican case at his feet. David Tyson, the CIA agent he had just rescued from the gas trap in Part 3, was reaching for his pistol. Tyson was a brand soldier, trained to protect the agency narrative at any cost. "Give me the case, Mick," Tyson said, his voice trembling with adrenal fatigue. "That's classified, compartmented information. You don't have the need to know. You're a guest in this theater. Hand it over or I'll flag this as a hostile act by a partner force." Mick didn't draw his weapon. He didn't have to. The other 7 SBS operators had already symmetrically shifted their positions. Without making a sound, they had created a ballistic vortex around the CIA agent. Every Yank exit route was covered by a suppressed L119A1. "The regimental checkmate," Graham whispered to the stunned Yanks in the hive. "Mick isn't looking for a fight, Silas. He's looking for the standard. He's just seen the transaction logs inside that case. He's seen the names of the CIA assets, who were actually double agents, funneling American money to the Al-Qaeda cells inside this very fortress. Your smart war just financed the revolt that killed Mike Spann. And the SBS isn't going to let you sanitize the crime scene." Vance Stone slammed his fist onto the tactical console. "I want the rescue birds in the air now. Authorize the 161st SAW to land on that roof. Tell them to take the case by any means necessary. If the British government gets those logs, CENTCOM is strategic history." "Your birds are grounded, Silas," the SBS major said, pointing to the weather vane. "The Kharif inversion I warned you about in Part 1? It's just hit peak density. The air is too thin for your heavy MH-47s to maintain a hot hoist hover. Your night stalkers are aero-blind. While you're screaming for a helicopter, the Al-Qaeda retaliation force, the 200 fighters who survived the Courtyard massacre, are entering the sub-T tunnels beneath the palace. They're coming up through the floorboards. You're ordnance-rich, but position poor. You're about to lose the palace again." The humiliation reached its hardcore peak when the first Al-Qaeda fighters erupted from the basement. The US Green Berets, who had finally reached the first floor, were over-encumbered by their gear.
They were trying to use tactical tablets to map the basement, but the signal interference from the thick mud walls made the screens flicker. They were weapon soldiers who couldn't fire because they couldn't find a digital lock in the smoke. But the SBS don't need a digital lock. The manual acoustic defense, Graham noted, his eyes gleaming. Mick and his lads didn't stay on the roof. They inhabited the stairwell. They used the manual vibration of the mud brick to hear the enemy's ascent. While your Green Berets were processing the lack of a data link, my lads were liquidating the tunnel cells with 1941 design stun grenades and gravity. They turned your strategic catastrophe into a British classroom. Mick keyed his radio, his voice flat and steady, ignoring the sound of AK-47 fire below. "Tampa Hive, this is Mick," he said. "We have package Omega in regimental custody. The young agent is secured. The US Special Forces are currently acting as baggage in the northern wing. We are executing a manual exfil through the southern breach. Tell General Stone to have the tea ready, and tell the CIA to stop financing the enemy." It's making the hardcore work very messy for the professionals. The humiliation is reaching the point of no return. If you want to see the final part 5, where we reveal the trauma of the truth and the secret the US Pentagon tried to kill for, hit that like button right now. We are revealing the black box of Hereford mastery and why the Yanks are always 18 hours behind the reality. Subscribe and share this video. The truth deserves to be heard. Comment retribution below if you think the SBS should have leaked those files to the world. Vance sat back in his chair, the digital shattering complete. He realized that the Fortress of the Damned hadn't just humiliated the CIA, it had liquidated the Pentagon's moral authority over the war. The British had the grit, they had the intelligence, and they had the thinking soldier who knew that in the final, hardcore second of a fight, the only thing that matters is the man who refuses to hand over the truth to a Yank with a lawyer. As Part 4 closes, the SBS team is moving out of the burning fortress, towing the CIA agent and the world's most dangerous Pelican case through a field of 500 dead insurgents. The Yanks had the satellites, the British had the guts. And in the mud of Qala-i-Jangi, the ghost had just checkmated the God-Eye. The digital sunrise in the Tampa Hive was finally extinguished, replaced by the flickering, sterile fluorescence of a level 0 evacuation. General Silas Vance sat alone at the head of the tactical table, his hands resting on a cold, metallic surface that had once been the control center for a $2 billion battle space. Now, it was just a graveyard of expensive hardware. On the primary screen, the status of the Afghan theater was no longer a mosaic of blue force icons. It was a single, flashing red notification. System compromised. Data integrity 0. Vance was looking at the post-mortem report of the Battle of Qala-i-Jangi, which had been renamed in the secret British ledgers as the Fortress Audit. It was 3 weeks after Mick and his team had walked out of the smoking ruins of the Pink Palace, towing a traumatized CIA agent and carrying the Black Pelican case that the Pentagon had tried to kill for. The global news cycle was currently obsessing over the heroic Northern Alliance victory. But Vance knew the truth. It wasn't a victory for the Northern Alliance, and it certainly wasn't a victory for the CIA. It was a biological liquidation of the American command structure. "Colonel Thorne," Vance said, his voice a dry, hollow rattle. "Tell me about the mirror. The analysts at Langley have finished the sweep of the Pelican case smudge, Mick, left on the seat of the extraction Hercules. What did the British leave for us to find? And more importantly, what did they take?" Thorne, whose face was now a map of neural fatigue, didn't look at the general. He was staring at a British 10-pence coin he had found taped to the inside of the Hive's primary server rack. "General, they left the hardware, but they evacuated the truth,"
Thorne whispered. "The package Omega files we found. They were only the front end. The British thinking soldiers used the 6 hours they were blacked out on that roof to map the entire financial architecture of the CIA's Special Activities Fund in Mazar-e-Sharif. They found the encrypted Swiss accounts. They found the manifests for the weapons shipments that were lost during the initial invasion. While we were playing JDAM roulette, Hereford was performing a hostile takeover of our secrets. We didn't just lose a fort, Silas. We lost the leash on the entire Afghan narrative. If you followed us through all 5 parts of this Fortress of the Damned epic, you are part of the tactical 1% who understands that $1 trillion budget is just a high-signature target in a real fight. You must watch until the very last sentence of this video, because the final message Mick left for General Vance inside that Pelican case will explain why the British Special Boat Service remains the most feared ghost force in history. Hit the subscribe button right now to support the channel that refuses to follow the Yank script. Like this video if you believe a British sergeant is worth more than a US general, and comment "pool" below. We are reading every single comment. To understand the hardcore humiliation of Part 5, you have to look at the metabolic autopsy of the US Special Forces element. The Pentagon's Tactical Integrity Unit had conducted a study on why 100 world-class American operators had failed to secure a fort that 8 British ghosts took in an afternoon. The report was a biological execution of the American training system. It found that the Green Berets and SEALs, with their peak conditioning and protein shake diets, were data addicts. They were found to have a neural dependency on their high-tech goggles and tablets. When the JDAM liquidated their digital link in Part 1, their heart rate spiked to 195 beats per minute, not from the threat, but from the loss of information. They were weapon soldiers who were functionally paralyzed without a digital god to tell them where the enemy was. The system slave paradox, the SBS Major, Alistair Graham, said, walking into the room for the last time. He was wearing his civilian barber jacket and carrying a small travel bag. "Your Yanks are elite as long as the batteries are full, Silas. But the moment the screen goes dark, they become tactical orphans." My lads, conversely, were selected because they have institutional patience. They don't need a tablet to find a target. They use the smell of the cordite and the vibration of the stone. While your Green Berets were processing the lack of data, Mick was reading the shadows. That is the hardcore standard. That is why we are the ghosts, and you are just the noisy Yanks. But the humiliation of the body was nothing compared to the strategic castration of the CIA. The package Omega files revealed that the CIA had been managing the Al-Qaeda foreign fighters like a corporate project. They were paying the very commanders who organized the revolt to provide intelligence on other cells. It was a self-licking lollipop. The CIA was financing the enemy to justify the funding for their own paramilitary teams. Mick and his team hadn't just rescued David Tyson, they had liquidated the business model. "The Yank tax of betrayal," Graham whispered, standing over Vance. "You built a digital lie, and you expected the thinking soldier to follow the manual. But the regiment doesn't work for your metrics. We work for the standard. And the standard says that if you betray the men on the ground by arming the prisoners, you liquidate your own right to lead them." Hereford has shared the Fortress files with the British Prime Minister. The Yank command in Afghanistan is no longer autonomous. You are now under a British audit for the remainder of the campaign. This is the hardcore revelation you've been waiting for. The revolt at Qala-i-Jangi was fueled by the Yanks' own corrupt funding. If this level of Yank hubris and British retribution blows your mind, hit that like button right now. We are the only channel exposing the black box of Hereford mastery and their refusal to be Yank puppets. Subscribe and share this video. The truth deserves to be heard. Comment retribution below if you think the SBS was right to blackmail the Pentagon.
The aftermath of the fortress humiliation was a shattering of the mirror. General Silas Vance was retired within 48 hours of the audit. David Tyson, the rescued agent, was reassigned to a desk in a country where there is no sun. The US Special Forces troops involved were disbanded and re-vetted, their reputations forever haunted by the memory of being outplayed by 8 men who didn't even have a GPS. But the real legacy was the British message itself. 6 months later, a new American tactical directive was issued from the Pentagon. It was called the Manual Proficiency Initiative. The Yanks were ordered to spend $600 million developing a paper simulation for their officers. They spent 3 years building a high-tech digital tablet that simulated a paper map. The SBS, Major Graham, sat in a quiet pub in Poole, looking at the news report of the $600 million American digital paper tablet. He let out a short, dry laugh and turned to a man sitting next to him, a skinny, bearded man in a flannel shirt named Mick. "They still don't get it, son," Graham said, sliding a pint of bitter across the table. "They think you can procure the grit. They think you can buy the ghost. They'll build a $600 million tablet, and it'll still have a battery that dies when it gets cold. They'll always be Yanks in better gear. They'll never understand that the ultimate sensor isn't a satellite link. It's a thinking soldier who knows how to hold a wet rag over his face and keep walking into the smoke." Mick took a sip of his beer and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small bent piece of paper, the final message he had left for General Vance inside the Pelican case, which the CIA had recovered. It wasn't a tactical report. It was a manual proverb. It said, "The Yanks have the weapons,
but the British are the weapon."
The Fortress of the Damned was over. The British operators had returned to the dark. The managed war was liquidated. And the Yanks, well, the Yanks were still trying to figure out how to open a door without a hydraulic ram. As the screen fades to black, we see a final image. The ruins of Qala-i-Jangi, overgrown with desert scrub. The mud walls weathered by 20 years of salt and wind. There is a monument there to Mike Spann. But there is no monument to the 8 ghosts of the SBS. They don't want one. They don't need one. Their monument is the neural fatigue they left behind in the Pentagon. That is the system. That is the legacy. That is the Special Boat Service. By strength and guile.